All right, guys, let's talk a little bit about the myth of omega-6 fats being bad for you. So this is really a popular myth that's been largely debunked, and we can honestly say, based on all the research we have, that polyunsaturated fats in general tend to be healthy. Now, that being said, obviously omega-3 are better than omega-6, but every time people bring up the whole situation of, well, omega-6 fats cause inflammation, they have all these problems, that is some nuance to that. So there is a small degree of truth to that, but it's been largely blown out of proportion. And the vast majority of the omega-6 that we are eating is good for us. And I'm not saying the bunch of highly damaged fats. I'm not telling you to eat a bunch of refined fats when I say that. So let me be clear. I'm talking about in a largely undamaged state. I'm not talking about when you've deep fried canola oil at high temperatures. Okay, so again, let's get that out of the way. Let's make sure that no one thinks that that's what we're saying. And so let's get over to the reality. So, I mean, example would be nuts and things, right? Nuts, even peanuts, all this stuff. And I'm not saying peanuts don't have some allergies for some people. That's usually your concern. So we're talking about linoleic acid. That is the primary omega-6 that we are consuming. And again, I'm talking about it in an undamaged form. Obviously, very high amounts of heat and things can absolutely oxidize and damage that fatty acid. The concern, though, that people previously had, and this was an old, outdated hypothesis, is that the pathways exist to convert linoleic acid into arachidonic acid. Okay. Now, arachidonic acid is an omega-6. It's just a rarer one, but it's not found in plant form omega-3, and it's found in trace amounts and some animal products. And some people actually feel that the arachidonic acid could be the real concern for inflammation, relative to some types of saturated fat in some of those foods. Again, a lot of nuance there. So let's set all that aside, though, and go over to the real crux of the matter, the conversion to arachidonic acid. And then we'll discuss, briefly what's been found when we look at linoleic acid itself. All right, the arachidonic acid, absolutely pro-inflammatory. Keeping in mind, in trace amounts, it's still beneficial. So we do need to be clear. We do want a little bit of inflammation in the body, but what we are trying to avoid is chronic, out of control inflammation. All right, arachidonic acid, pro-inflammatory, and too much of it can absolutely induce extra inflammation in the body. Of course, right? It incites all sorts of inflammatory prostaglandins and things. So here's the reality. The pathway exists, but we do it at a very, very, very low rate. Okay? In fact, what we usually find is that our body will only do it at about the rate that we need it to get a beneficial amount of arachidonic acid. Okay? It turns out that the model that we were looking at with it was in rodents. And in humans, it turns out our conversion rate's actually really inefficient at it. We'll do it, but only in just enough for us to get some minor health benefits and things like that. And when we eat more linoleic acid, it doesn't necessarily increase the conversion through the enzymic pathways. Okay, because we're kind of going to do the amount we're going to do of it. The other thing to consider, we have to have linoleic acid. It is an essential fatty acid. If you have none of it in your diet, you will develop a deficiency. It will create health problems, and in worst case scenario, technically cell death and all sorts of problems. Because again, it is something our body does have to have in trace amounts for survival. Okay, so we need to be clear on that. When we talk about essential fatty acids, there's only two of them. Linoleic acid is one of those two. Alpha linoleic acid is the other. So when people say we have essential fats, that is specifically what they're talking about. Well, linoleic acid is an omega-6, and it's the primary one we're going to get from most of our foods. All right. So that's the case. So what's the reality? Well, the reality is, when it's actually been studied, when significant amounts of healthy linoleic acid, again, we're talking about in a whole foods form. We're not talking about a bunch of fried canola oil or fried soybean oil that has been subjected to high temperatures. When these things are consumed in large amounts in a complete undamaged form, it lowers inflammation. That is what the research has actually found in humans. It is associated with a slight reduction in inflammation. Multiple studies have confirmed this, and it's immediate. So when we are given it, inflammatory markers tend to decrease. So the reality is most omega-6s that we're consuming, at least in a whole foods form, if we're not eating a bunch of garbage. Again, not telling you to eat a bunch of fried chicken and french fries. Okay, let's come back over to it in a more complete, undamaged form. Lowers inflammation, and this is what the data shows. Okay, so we come back over to nuts. Again, people worry about nut consumption because of the possible inflammation, but yet this is exactly what we see. Study after study, people who eat significant amounts of nuts, not just walnuts being really great because of the omega-3, but nuts in general. What happens? We see improved inflammatory markers. We see improved insulin sensitivity. We see improved lipid profile. Okay? And it makes sense. Look at what nuts are. Nuts are large amount of linoleic acid, which we know is mildly anti-inflammatory. They usually have antioxidants, oftentimes polyphenols, fiber, magnesium, a lot of minerals. Okay? Well, it makes sense. These is a food you should be eating. Nuts are great. Unless you happen to have an allergy to them, in which case, pretty bad. But overall, nuts tend to be good. Again, these are high sources of omega-6. Perfectly healthy. The research shows it. We see it directly in the lab. We see it in the epidemiology. The only real problems we're having with this is a bunch of refined oils cooking in them, particularly at high temperatures. Okay, that's our concern. Don't fry your food. Okay, we shouldn't be sitting around eating, fried chicken and French fries. But we already know this. We know this already. This isn't something new. Every human being out there knows you shouldn't be eating stuff like that if you want to be healthy. Okay, if you don't want inflammation and heart disease and cancers and all that, that's not stuff you should be eating regularly. But omega-6s themselves, perfectly healthy, very pro-health. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.